couple of months now, the Middle East has once again been in turmoil. The conflict between Israel and Palestine, or rather with Hamas, has once again made the front pages of the international press. The world is on alert, and the major powers are even more so.
U.S. military deployment to prevent the spread of conflict in the Middle East. 2,000 troops, 2 aircraft carriers, and 135 fighter jets. China stationed up to 6 warships in Middle East amid rising tensions from Israel-Gaza war. Iran's foreign minister warns Israel from Beirut to stop Gaza attacks or risk huge earthquake.
But since the beginning of the conflict, doesn't it seem to you that there is one missing piece in this complex puzzle? What is happening with the biggest Arab power in the Middle East? What is happening with Saudi Arabia? VisualPolitik viewers, the Saudi regime is in a particularly delicate position. On the one hand, this conflict is particularly bad news for its economic growth plans, including its geopolitical and strategic interests. The tension right now is bad for all that. What's more, the shadow of Iran lurks in the region, and Saudi Arabia is very clear. If Hamas wins, Iran wins. As a consequence, many analysts are already raising the possibility that Saudi Arabia is eagerly hoping for a quick victory in Israel in this conflict. Although I can't say it outright, everything indicates that this is exactly the case. But what economic interests does the Saudi regime have to cause them to want Hamas's defeat? Why would a Hamas victory be a victory for Iran? Could Hamas's success escalate the conflict between the Saudis and the Houthis in Yemen? Well, in this video, we will answer these and other questions. Let's fire up the engines and let's get started.
Negotiation on standby.
Just a couple of weeks before Hamas attacked Israel on the 7th of October 2023, Saudi Arabia and Israel were moving quickly to finalize the agreements that would normalize their political and economic relations once and for all. An agreement promoted by the Biden administration 3 years after the famous Abraham Accords brought Israel to shake hands with several Arab nations. But that was only the beginning. By far the most pursued by Washington, and also above all by Prime Minister Netanyahu, was to reach the agreement with Riyadh. For its part, the Arab country was also eager to reap both the economic and military benefits that the UAE is already getting since the signing of the Abraham Agreements. What benefits? Basically, access to the prosperous and advanced Israeli economy, and above all, Israeli technology. Naturally, besides all that, to achieving the much desired and necessary regional stability. And all this is happening at a time when Saudi Arabia is particularly crazy about diversifying its economy. Keep in mind that, for the moment, its main economic livelihood is still oil exports. Therefore, in an attempt to overcome this dependence once and for all, the largest Arab power is promoting a series of mega projects through its Vision 2030 strategy. Basically, a sort of Mission Impossible Desert Edition. Because VisualPolitik community, we are talking about true mega projects, which I'm sure you have all heard about.
The Line, the surreal desert city already under construction in Saudi Arabia. Neom to see world's largest floating industrial complex, Oxagon.
With these projects, Saudi Arabia aims to make its economy less vulnerable. Yet, in order to build them and succeed, the regime is clear. It needs stability in the region. The agreement it had been negotiating with Israel and the United States was crucial to achieving this goal. Even so, no matter how far along the negotiations were, there were still major obstacles. The truth is that the Saudi demands proved to be a real challenge for the survival of the negotiations themselves. For instance, the Arab regime demanded, among other things, that the United States commit itself to the full defense of its entire territory. On top of that, it did not give up its desire to develop its civilian nuclear infrastructure with American help, and not surprisingly, in close contact with the Palestinian Authority, it demanded that Israel put a stop to the colonization of the West Bank and withdraw from the territory. Washington, for its part, pressured Riyadh to increase its crude oil production, among other things. In other words, on the table was not only the agreement with Israel, but also the large-scale reissue of the US-Saudi Defense Pact and a new OPEC energy policy. We are not, therefore, talking about an agreement that was straightforward to reach. Nevertheless, despite all the discrepancies, negotiations continued. All three countries knew that they stood to gain a great deal from this agreement. The United States could counterbalance the growing influence of China in the Middle East. Israel could take a giant step towards ending the historic Arab-Israeli tension, and Riyadh could stabilize the region, enjoying US protection and a powerful new economic and technological partner Israel. Thus, despite all the discrepancies, the negotiations finally seemed to be going full steam ahead. However, on the 7th of October came the brutal Hamas attack, and days later, everything went down the drain.
Saudi Arabia pauses normalization talks with Israel amid ongoing war with Hamas.
In fact, the Biden administration claimed that Hamas attacked Israel precisely to break off negotiations between the three countries.
One of the reasons why they acted like they did, why Hamas moved on Israel, is because they knew I was about to sit down with the Saudis, because the Saudis wanted to recognize Israel and that would in fact unite the Middle East.
Be that as it may, the reality is that the Hamas attack has disrupted all plans. Saudi Arabia is now juggling its options to avoid blowing up all its options. Listen up.
Balancing the scales.
The Hamas attacks provoked a political earthquake at the international level, with countries aligning themselves with one side or the other. Surely the opinions of Western countries, along with China and Russia, are the ones you will remember most. But, of course, the Arab countries also took a stand. For example, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, Israel's partners since the Abraham Accords, condemned the Hamas attack. Qatar, for its part, condemned Israel for its constant pressure on the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. But what about Saudi Arabia? Well, unlike in previous cases, it did not have the luxury of choosing between black and white, so it chose to play with the grey. While calling for a lasting ceasefire and the promotion of the two-state solution, it has condemned both the Hamas attack and Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank. And you may be wondering, but wasn't it Hamas that has ruined the economic plans of the Saudis? Well, yes, indeed. But this is not enough to position itself clearly in Israel's favour. Keep in mind that the Palestinian cause remains a particularly sensitive issue within the Arab and Muslim community, and Saudi society is certainly no exception. A very different thing, however, is the level of sympathy in Saudi Arabia for Hamas, which is at rock bottom. In fact, while in 2014, 48% of Saudis had a positive view of Hamas, this year only 10% held that perception. This trend not only mirrors the United Arab Emirates, but also the feeling among Gaza's own population, which overwhelmingly prefers the Strip to be administered by the Palestinian Authority. Be that as it may, Hamas's loss of popularity among the Saudis is hardly surprising. After all, since the creation of the Palestinian group in the 1980s, Saudi Arabia had strong reticence and distanced itself from this group. Keep in mind that Hamas emerged as a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, we cannot forget that the Saudi monarchy condemned, and still condemns, the Muslim Brotherhood because they consider them a threat to its own survival. Nevertheless, the relationship existed. In fact, unlike Washington, Riyadh did recognize the electoral victory of Hamas in the Gaza Strip in 2006. However, from 2012 onwards, this relationship of mere cordiality ended up going awry. The Arab Springs had put many Arab governments in check, so the Saudi royal house understood that it could not afford any missteps. For example, they supported a coup to remove Mohammed Morsi in Egypt. Morsi was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood and a leader relatively close to Hamas. Since then, relations between Riyadh and Gaza have gone from bad to worse, to the point that Saudi police have arrested Hamas members in the country. Yet, in the last 2 years, Saudi Arabia and Hamas have been moving closer together again. Why? Basically because Riyadh knew that for the signing of the agreement with Israel to go ahead, it was essential to find a political solution in Palestine. And of course, the tension with Hamas was a major stumbling block. For this reason, the Saudi regime released Hamas prisoners and also allowed its leaders to make the pilgrimage to Mecca from Qatar. But in spite of everything, Riyadh has always been clear: Hamas is a hindrance. Now, is it only because it hurts their economic plans, or is there more to it? Well, listen up.
Iran controlling the game.
If you are a loyal follower of VisualPolitik, you will already know that Saudi Arabia has a particularly awkward neighbour with whom it has had several run-ins: Qatar. Since the arrival of Emir al-Thani in 1995, Saudi Arabia has had a tense relationship with this small Arab country. Whether for providing coverage of the Arab Spring through the Al Jazeera channel, or for allegedly encouraging Islamist terrorism in the region, Saudi Arabia and Qatar have been far from good friends. In fact, between 2017 and 2021, Saudi Arabia and many other countries such as Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Jordan imposed a savage blockade on Qatar. Qatar. A blockade that, by the way, as we already told you, was a huge failure. Now, the tension can flare up again, because Qatar has once again shown its support for Hamas. Nor is it unusual. Qatar has been harboring officials and former senior officials of the Palestinian group, such as Khaled Mashal, for more than a decade. What's more, Doha has so far failed to condemn the terrorist attack, which, not surprisingly, has reinforced both the accusations that it is a promoter of terrorism and the idea that Qatar has a strong interest in the survival of Hamas. This time, however, Doha has not been able to be overly belligerent. Washington, which has a large military base in the country, would not have allowed it. And that explains precisely this important news item.
Hamas leaders leave Qatar for unknown destination.
Be that as it may, Qatar is not Saudi Arabia's main concern at the moment. Iran is. Okay, you might think that tensions between the two countries have disappeared after news stories like these.
Chinese broker deal upends Mideast diplomacy and challenges US. The agreement negotiated in Beijing to restore relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran signaled at least a temporary reordering of the usual alliances and rivalries, with Washington left on the sidelines.
However, nothing could be further from the truth. Iran and Saudi Arabia remain great regional rivals, two giants that seek to dominate the Middle East and that do not trust each other. And it is here that Iran has an asset that Riyadh would love to have: its non-state armies. We've already told you about them on this channel not long ago. Hezbollah is Iran's main and most powerful non-state ally. And as you may remember, Hamas has also received huge amounts of money and weapons from Iran and Hezbollah. Yet, Tehran has another ally that usually goes unnoticed, an ally that is on Saudi Arabia's doorstep in Yemen. We are talking, of course, about the Houthis. Organized in the 1990s as a political group seeking to channel the demands of the country's Zaidi Muslims, they became more radical over time. They even started several armed clashes between 2004 and 2010 against the government of the dictator Ali Abdullah Saleh, whom they accused of corruption and of being under the orders of Saudi Arabia. In 2011, the Houthis played an important role in the country's revolution that ended with the overthrow of Saleh and the coming to power of Mansur al-Hadi. But it was not until 2014 that the Houthis gained real power in Yemen. In September of the same year, they took Sana'a, the capital of the country. Yemen was then plunged into a civil war that lasts to this day, and in which Saudi troops have intervened directly to ensure the functioning of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a crucial zone for the international transport of hydrocarbons. However, Saudi Arabia's intervention also led to another key factor. Guess what it is? 3, 2, 1. That's right, Iranian aid to the Houthis. In fact, since 2011, news stories like this have been the order of the day.
US Navy says it seized weapons from Iran likely bound for Houthis in Yemen. US Navy seizes 70 tons of Iranian missile fuel from sailboat to Yemen. US military says huge Iranian weapons shipment destined for Yemen rebels seized in Gulf of Oman.
Saudi Arabia and the Houthis have been clashing militarily since 2015. It's a war that has left more than 400,000 people dead and 80% of Yemen's population plunged into a severe humanitarian crisis. Conflict is no longer as bloody as it was in the early years, and a temporary ceasefire has even been achieved. Nevertheless, the conflict between Israel and Hamas may change everything again. News like this is a good reflection of this major threat.
Iran looks to Houthi proxies to escalate fight with Israel. The Iranian-backed militia in Yemen has launched drone and missile attacks on Israeli and American targets. American officials fear the group could go too far and incite a wider war. Houthi militia threatens to block all ships headed to Israel.
VisualPolitik community, the war could return to Yemen and that could drag Riyadh back. Keep in mind that a Houthi victory could mean the beginning of other Shiite uprisings in the Middle East. Even in Saudi Arabia itself, a country where the Shiite community is located precisely in the territories with the greatest oil activity, let alone if Israel were to intervene militarily when the time comes. That would leave Riyadh between a rock and a hard place.
Israel ready to act against Houthi rebels if international community fails to do so, National Security Advisor says.
So you see, all indications are that Saudi Arabia is actually hoping for a quick Israeli victory over Hamas, a victory that will once and for all end the headache of this Palestinian group, reduce Iran's influence in the region, and serve as a deterrent to other groups. But at this point, the question is now over to you. Do you think that Saudi Arabia will openly support Israel, despite everything that has happened? Will we see an agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia soon? You can leave me your answers in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like the video, go ahead and like it, and I will be seeing you in the next one. All the best. See you very soon.